Good day, everyone, and welcome to the CNBC Africa Special with myself, Fifi Peters. Good to be with you as always. Now, for many of us, 2021 is starting to feel a lot like 2020, with the new variants of COVID-19 making much of last year's status quo of working and learning and medicating remotely still in play. More worrying, however, is the concern that the mutation of the virus may prolong the economic downturn in many parts of the world, including Africa. We're still in for testing times, and succeeding in the latest trial will require all hands on deck. In the next hour, we will review how partnerships can unlock opportunities for growth and fill socio-economic voids in Africa. I will be having this conversation with an esteemed panel that will be making representations from across the continent. Let me introduce you to them. Mandisa Motobela, who is the Head of Stakeholder Relations at Old Mutual Limited, and Githuku-Shongwe, the representative of UN Women, Nuru Mugambi, Public Affairs Director of the Kenya Bankers Association, and Samuel Matekete, the Group Chief Executive Officer of Old Mutual Zimbabwe. And of course, we welcome your insights as our audience. Feel free to express your opinions during the course of the discussion using social media. Good afternoon to the panelists. Let us begin the conversation. I think that we're all quite familiar with the African proverb that if you would like to go fast, you go at it alone. But if you want to go far, you need to go together. And I'd like to get everyone's view on the state of togetherness on the continent right now by way of what it looks like between the private and the public sector. Mandisa, just to begin with you, your view of the current state of partnerships between both stakeholders in Africa right now.
Thanks, Fifi. You know, they say that every cloud has a silver lining. And if there is anything that has been the silver lining of COVID-19, I would definitely say that the increase in partnership across the sectors, public and private, as well as civil society and labor, has been demonstrative during this period. I think that coming into this period, we've all realized the value of working together instead of working in silos and working in isolation. And it's been able to pull the continent together in ways that I haven't seen it previously. I think it has increased efficiency and also availed resources that would otherwise have not been available had we continued in our individual capacities. And for that reason, I think that we can really celebrate the success that has been demonstrated by partnerships across the continent between the various sectors stemming from the response to the global crisis.
Because it has been around 10 months and counting that we have been fighting against this global crisis, and it feels like we're entering a new fight now with these variants and also the concerns of a second or rather a third and a fourth and possibly even a fifth wave that may still come. So I'd like to bring in the rest of the panelists now. And Anne, just your view on the state of partnerships currently. Are you as positive in your response as Mandisa, who spoke about the level of collaboration, the strong level of collaboration that we have witnessed so far?
Thank you so much, Fifi, and good afternoon to our listeners. I will confirm, just as Mandisa did, that this really has been perhaps the biggest, the most positive outcome of this period, because it really is impossible for us with this COVID-19 pandemic impacting every one of us, for us to move alone. And just to say, for example, very early in the pandemic, where we as UN Women globally announced that we are seeing a shadow pandemic, a pandemic that is following right behind the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to start taking, very, very, very speedy action to make sure that we were able to deal with the impact on women in terms of violence, but also because they were disproportionately affected as caregivers and so on. And so one of the very first things that happened was that we reached out to companies in the private sector to be able to support the work that we do. And I'm very happy to announce that there are some very significant contributions that were made by companies like, and I don't know if we should be mentioning companies or whether it becomes advertising, but we had companies who came forward to support women's shelters, who came forward to support civil society organizations to make sure that they were geared up to be able to support women in particular and their families. So there definitely has been a big move. So for us at the United Nations, a big partnership. We in South Africa, for instance, work with the Solidarity Fund. We are partners with the Solidarity Fund. We do this from country to country, where we've come together with the different private sector partnerships that have been put on the table, always working with government as well. So this has become the way in which we've worked. It's a new way, and I think this is the way we're going to keep going forward.
Nuru, I'd like to come to you next, because so far the panel has set the scene that we are moving in the right direction when it comes to a collaboration between all stakeholders. But what has your experience been, perhaps from an East Africa perspective, in the recent months that we have been grappling against this virus?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I think what we're all witnessing, and I imagine it's reverberating right across the continent, is the fact that for the first time, we're seeing a social issue destabilize economies. Typically, when we talk about sustainability from a development perspective, we really look at environmental sustainability and economic sustainability. We rarely give currency to the issue about social risk. And I think we in the financial sector are beginning to have a greater appreciation of the exposure that we have within the social space, especially within the informal economy. I think a lot of the disruption that we are seeing in our economies, particularly in the SME space, is because of how largely informal we are in how we operate our businesses. But that's the dark side. But the bright side is the fact that this issue of partnerships, like Mandisa is mentioning and Ms. Anne is mentioning, I think the government, private sector really rallied together very quickly on the continent, particularly in March and April, to really bring together fiscal policies, monetary policies, collaborate to raise funding to support and bring in social safety net programs. So a lot of partnerships has been happening, and that's what I call the COVID kairos, that window of opportunity that's opened up. And indeed, although we have seen lots of job losses in Kenya, for example, about 2 million Kenyans have lost their jobs, we have also seen that silver lining. On average, we're seeing about 300 new businesses opened every day in Kenya because of COVID, because people are unemployed and they're looking for ways to protect their families and gain a livelihood. So it's that balancing act that we are seeing both at the private sector and policy perspective that is the story of COVID.
Samuel, just lastly, in terms of the opening remarks for this discussion, I mean, Zimbabwe, one could argue, was very similar to South Africa in the sense that both countries went into the pandemic quite crippled in terms of the states of the economy. And what you also found pre-COVID-19 was quite a big divide between business and government in tackling the then common enemy, which was the economy. But how would you describe that gap right now between business and government over the past 10 months, as they've had to fight another common enemy on top of the economy, and that, of course, being the virus? Has it narrowed in your view? And perhaps if you could just give us examples of where you have seen perhaps a stronger level of collaboration happening in this recent time.
Thank you, Fifi, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel. Partnerships, if we look at them in the perspective of, the longer-term view, have always been there, perhaps at two levels. We have had partnerships between business and the communities directly, but there's also been partnerships along the way where we have had to work with government or government agencies to attend to a need in the community and in the society. I think the state of our partnerships has been, previously, one where business has been accused of being tokenist, if you like. We do the minimum, and sometimes it's confused with, how we want to profile our brands, and therefore, has not always been taken seriously in terms of the way that it has been received by the communities that we have served. You would also see governments, on the other hand, sometimes being skeptical, especially, I'm sure, on the continent. Sometimes you find governments wanting to protect certain space, or if they want you to proceed to do certain things, wanting to be part of everything that you're doing, maybe for different reasons. And so the partnership has had issues in terms of how it has actually delivered value to the communities that we serve. But the experiences of the recent past have meant that we have come closer to each other, the various players in the partnerships that we have had, because the need itself has demonstrated itself to be the focus, the point of focus for everyone in the partnership, more than, the things that might have been emphasized before, which is, how do we ensure that we position this intervention, or if it's government, how do we ensure that this sensitivity and that is managed? I think the experiences of the last 10 months have actually brought us closer and, in a way, drove home the point that when we are in these partnerships and we are collaborating in these partnerships, it's about shared value. What is it that we want to get out of it, and for the benefit of the community more than anything else? And so we would like to hope, as Nuru said, this is a silver lining to a cloud, which we should sustain into the future, to say that the way we will collaborate to deliver value, which itself is shared in the communities that we are coexisting in, that it will be shaped differently going forward to be more sustainable and to take the perspective of the longer term view.
But I think the panel will agree with me when I say that, of course, much more still needs to be done. And although it does sound like there has been quite a strong sense of working together in the past 10, 11 months or so, there also has been a bit of cracks in the system from an outsider point of view. We have seen, business not always agreeing with the lockdown measures of the government's handling of COVID-19 and its attempts to balance that of lives and also livelihoods. So as we do press forward, and we certainly press forward to realizing that silver lining that the panel has been talking about, I'd like to ask you all, in which areas do we need to focus on really bedding down those partnerships? In which areas would you say, Mandisa, as I come to you, does this fervent kumbaya spirit between the private and the public sector need to be a lot stronger?
Fifi, I'm inclined to say long may the kumbaya spirit live, because it seems to motivate us to achieve our common goals a lot more effectively than a combative spirit, or at least one that's at loggerheads with one another. You're absolutely right in highlighting the fact that it hasn't all been plain sailing. There've been divergent views at times, and I think some very robust conversations have taken place across the different sectors regarding the measures that have been taken. And it's important for those to come through, because I think it shows the health of the democracies of our nations, as well as the safety of freedom of expression, as well as the right to operate businesses, and to ensure that workers' needs are also met. So that healthy tension is an important part of ensuring that the course that we take is actually one that serves the needs and the interests of multiple stakeholders. And we've appreciated that incredibly over this period. It has not been easy, but I can say with relative certainty that it has been much more available to us as the private sector in particular, to access the audience of leaders in the public sector in particular. We have had numerous engagements with the Minister of Finance, with the Minister of Health, with DTIC in South Africa in particular. And as Anne said, the work that's being done by the Solidarity Fund has brought everyone together in very meaningful ways. And we see that theme consistently across the markets in which we operate. To answer the second part of your question regarding, where it's not working as well, or what can we continue to do, I think a big learning for me has been the fact that we've traditionally, as players in the space, thought to bring only our expertise to the table. as Old Mutual, we would bring exclusively access to finance and financial services solutions. We're learning very much that what we need to bring to the table is a willingness to work together and a willingness to bring together players that have resources that can unlock opportunities for furthering those partnerships. And so while we continue to primarily offer what we have always been strong in as different players, I think we've also seen that convening a forum of stakeholders and inviting divergent views has yielded results. And that's why I think the benefit of being able to have a Miss Anne on this platform, even as UN Women, has been fantastic for us. The Kenya Bankers Association, represented by Nuru in this space, has been a partner of ours in East Africa for a long time, but they've also been able to introduce us to multiple other players through different forums in their space, and that's given us greater access as well. So we're thinking differently about partnership. We're not just bringing sort of a humanitarian eye or a financial services eye, but we're bringing a how to get things done eye, and I think it's changing the game.
Yeah, and I'd just like to throw in an idea for the discussion, because right now we're all talking about the vaccination rollout program and how it will be done and who will be involved, and it seems like there's been a variety of or a number of private sector players who have put their hands up to assist government in the rollout, to making sure that as many Africans are inoculated as possible. Just an idea, as we do continue this discussion, as of in which areas do you think we have got the opportunity and we have the need right now to strengthen the partnerships that have so far developed quite well in the past while? So, and if I just come to you, and I imagine that you will highlight the importance of making sure that the inequality gap between or the gender parity gap doesn't widen any further, but just your thoughts on areas that definitely need to be clamped down in terms of collaboration.
Thank you so much. This is a very important question, and I think the language that we've been using, and the Secretary General of the United Nations has been using the language of building back better. When we've had this kind of disruption, you want to make sure that the world that we come back to when we eventually get back to normal is a better world from the world that we came from. But for us at UN Women, it's about building back better equal. So where are those opportunities to build better equal? And the reason this is so important is because the impact has been unequal. And that it has been unequal in that, as you had, as Nuru is talking about 2 million jobs lost in Kenya, if you break it down and disaggregate that data, you will find that in general, it is about 2/3 of those who lost jobs who are women, many of whom have already insecure jobs and are in jobs like domestic work, jobs which are really precarious, and they now are the ones who are taking care of families with very little care. So the one big thing is about how to invest in jobs and enterprise opportunities. And actually, the COVID economy is an economy in of itself, as Nuru was sharing. And so one of the big areas that we've been pushing for is for there to be investment in women businesses to be able to, put PPE on the table. These are easy areas for them. The barriers to entry are minimum. But as you know, there was massive corruption across the whole continent because of those who had access to opportunities there. Now, instead, if we could now redirect those investments, and South Africa has a policy for 40% preferential procurement to all women-owned businesses. Kenya has 30%. The AU is pushing on 30%. So if every African country dedicated and committed to make sure that anything that is purchased in this COVID environment, including that is around the vaccines, there's lots of opportunities, even in terms of the actual vaccination. Being able to target women businesses would be transformational. Another big area, of course, is the area of care. All of a sudden, women who are at work, children are at home, and so it has been simply impossible. And I know that there have been great examples from across the continent where there have been some, cash grants or different kinds of vouchers that are provided to women to be able to get care for their children so that they can continue to run businesses. So the whole area of social protection care.
Certainly agreed. Then let's ask the financiers of this investment exactly what they think about this, and perhaps the appetite for investing further into women-owned businesses, into small businesses, and also into perhaps businesses that are owned by the youth in this attempt to build back better. Nuru, perhaps if you can speak on behalf of the Kenya Banking Association about what Anne has said about strengthening the investments in some of these social areas. How are such conversations perhaps happening within the banking quarters there in Kenya? How is the financial sector there looking to build back better, as it were?
Sure, thank you, Fifi. Maybe I'll talk broadly and then I'll come to Kenya. So just broadly, I think there are three key areas that we as a continent really need to look at for strengthening, especially due to this COVID experience. And the three areas, one is enterprise development that we're talking about. The second is the area of climate change resilience. As much as we're also focused and zeroed in on this issue of COVID, climate change remains the biggest risk that faces our continent. So if you look at GDP impact in Kenya, for example, COVID has affected us, reduced our GDP by down to about 2.5%, literally halving our GDP. The effects of climate change would probably exacerbate that. And then the third area that we really need to look at strengthening is really the continent's response to the fourth industrial revolution, which in my view is being accelerated because we're all shifting to a digital business model. So I think those three areas, when you look at Kenya, for example, we see the multilateral development banks partnering with local banks, with multinational banks, really to support the SME sector, particularly from an asset quality perspective, really trying to de-risk some of these assets. And we really welcome that. I think what we are finding, and also the ITC, which is the International Trade Center, in one of their studies called Pulse Check, what they are finding is that the multilateral development banks are beginning to partner better. So no more this competition for the scramble for Africa's finance that's been happening. I think the MDBs are really working together to see how to collaborate and really align and create sustainable impact through their capital. And we welcome that. We know the ecosystem of MDB financing around COVID is about $230 billion, which is a lot of capital, which needs to be allocated in the most efficient way, so we can see sustainability. So areas like what Anne is talking about, the women economy, looking at the youth economy, which was really affected by COVID, but now we're beginning to see young people beginning to see a recovery of their incomes, which is a promising sign for us here in Kenya. Within the climate change area, I think it's also another area of opportunity and innovation in terms of enhancing resilience. I think resilience is that key term of building back better. And that whole notion of building back better was introduced by the Japanese government once they experienced several environmental crises. So I think climate change resilience is a key area that we would like to see strengthening of partnerships. We've been advocating for green finance. Kenya saw the first green bond being issued in East and Central Africa last year. Of course, South Africa, you all are experts in this game, but we're just getting into this game. So if we can see more countries really promoting green finance innovation, that would be great. And on the fourth industrial revolution, Fifi, really, this is an area that I'm personally really concerned about because I believe that we're leaving people behind if we're not able to address issues around ICT technology capabilities, technological capabilities, I should say. So how are we ensuring that those in rural and peri-urban areas have energy infrastructure, have technological capabilities so that they can trade, so that they can learn? And we've seen that that gap because of COVID, that gap of those who have access to ICT, who can continue with their businesses digitally. You talked about telemedicine in the opening. So we're really looking at how can we ensure that we're investing in the ICT infrastructure so we're not leaving anybody behind, the youth, but also persons with disabilities. And that's an area that we're also looking at the Kenya Bankers Association. We had a very interesting project last year where we were looking at our banking systems. We worked with 7 banks to look at, can people with disabilities operate, function independently? This issue of dignity, can they operate and function independently through mobile banking, for example? So these are some of the areas that I think are opportunities for partnership from a financial sector perspective.
Right. And Samuel, to bring you in to finish off at this particular point, I suppose as, you know, one of the largest, or if not the largest company that is listed on the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange, the responsibility of Old Mutual Zimbabwe is a lot greater to ensure the build back narrative plays out, in the sense that there is an expectation that bigger players are more active in the area of corporate social responsibility. But in your view, how much more room is there to support the current recovery that everyone is hoping to, really kick-start? I know that Old Mutual has been quite supportive of its businesses and its members in the recent while as the crisis has transpired. But how much more room do you have to support areas like the COVID economy that Nuri was talking about, to ensure that we don't exacerbate the digital divide that's currently underway? Take it away.
Thank you, Fifi. So you make a good point there in terms of the room and the space where we can play. And I think one of the gaps that we have to close is one dealing with the capacity of the government to deal with certain issues. And I think there lies another opportunity where private sector, which is a repository of skills, certain expertise that's not necessarily available in government, to come in and partner with government to ensure that that repository of skills and experience, which is quite deep and is in the private sector, can lend itself available, as a resource to government in crafting policies, in coming up with frameworks of how we can interact and get private capital to participate in certain interventions which are for the benefit of the wider community. So I think there is space there that should be created, through policy on the part of government, but also transparency around where is the need, and be more visible to everyone so that we can all, understand where we can lend our hand. You are also right, secondly, to observe that there is a big obligation on the private sector out of the experiences of COVID-19 to realize that whatever interventions we want to partner with government on have to be done so on a sustainable basis. Long-term sort of view, I come back to that point, because there is, value in trying to ensure that we are prepared for circumstances such as COVID-19 or other pandemic, better prepared in the future, in the ways that we collaborate to create the resilience today. So I think that's the space that we need to create, to say, outside what we have to deal with now, how can we have an operational, way of working that looks at us working together into the future to make sure that we are more resilient. We also look at the communities that are more vulnerable. And I know that Anne has spoken about the women and what is being done to ensure that they can be part of, coming back to what we want to see in the ways of our economies. But I think there are the youths. So one of the learnings coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic was that a lot of the innovative ideas that are actually very relevant to addressing the issues that become so difficult sometimes was actually, already available in terms of ideas from the youth. They just needed to be harnessed. So I can share with you an example that, just as we were thinking about how we can get enough protective equipment for the frontliners, we found that the youths in the universities, at least 2-3 universities in our case, were already ahead. They had come up with the ideas of how they can mass produce some of this, and what they needed was private sector to come in with the capital, which I would hasten to say we actually also had to do. And it's amazing the experience we had, because in one example, we more than doubled the capacity, and in another example, we did 10 times capacity of, what could be produced by the youths in an organized, arrangement such as a university and so forth. So that's another way that we can bring in some of the learnings into the future, building resilience within the youths and making it possible for them to be part of the solution as we do that. And then lastly, I think one of the things that we also saw, which we need to be addressing, is that there is a certain minimum level of self-sufficiency that has to be, invested in. Whether you talk about at a household level or you talk about at an economic level. Because the first test that COVID-19 brought was if logistics to import from far, was no longer working, what arrangements were there present to at least sustain yourself? So there are interventions that I believe ought to be thought through around what are the basic minimum requirements we can address to make sure that we reduce the level of dependence, at least on necessities, basic necessities, on things that may be themselves challenged when we have got a pandemic.
Thanks, Samuel, because it's often the benefit of hindsight that is the best teacher. And yourself and Mandisa have actually alluded to this in terms of what can be done differently in terms of pushing forward and really brokering those stronger partnerships. And you did touch on the fact that, just looking back, perhaps what we need to do in looking forward is build back more resilience within the youth. But can I just ask the panel for their reflections of what has transpired, perhaps even pre-COVID-19, but in terms of using your benefit of hindsight and seeing what didn't quite work well in terms of partnerships before, and how we can correct and make sure that it works better as we move forward into 2021 and beyond. Mandisa, if we could just get your thoughts on this matter.
Sure, thanks, Fifi. I think the big word that stands out for me is data, and more data. Data is gold. And I think that as we move into this 4IR world that Nuru was speaking about earlier, we realize that more and more. One of the things that we struggled with at the beginning of the pandemic was contact tracing, for instance. It seems relatively simple for us to know where people are, particularly with the kind of devices that we operate and the ability to turn on and share our locations. And rolling out a solution for contact tracing actually took us much longer. And I think if we were more agile and able to do that with better data, I think that would have been something that we would have been able to respond to a lot better. Having said data, I also think that access, particularly to ICT infrastructure, is something that is highlighted to us increasingly as an area that we need to do better in, to avail the resources for it, but also to leverage it better in communities that don't have the kind of access that we do in our urban centers. I think that becomes fundamentally important, particularly as we see businesses switching to offer their services digitally, as we see people working remotely. One of the challenges that we had was for some of our call center agents earlier on at the start of the pandemic who needed to be reinforced in terms of their ability to access high-speed bandwidth in order to continue to work at home. So those are all of the things that are becoming apparent to us. So I don't necessarily think that these are new challenges, but they're perhaps heightened by the world that we've gone into and our ability to respond to them better and more effectively and efficiently will assist us not only to come through this season, but also our ability to respond to other forms of crises we may face and we may encounter going forward. I think for me, one of the last ones that I'll share that I think has been particularly significant is the ability to develop agile micro solutions. Agile micro solutions that are quick to roll out and quick to turn around. Often as large players, large organizations, governments and corporates, we've got big programs, long-term plans, and the ability to be agile and respond to the needs of a crisis and really get going have not been our traditional strength. Working together with startups has, of course, changed the game in the sense that the startup culture lends itself much more readily to that responsiveness, and we've been able to get closer to a lot of organizations who are smaller, more nimble and more agile, and use that to infuse into our larger operations in order to draw from our strengths from a capacity point of view, as Sam was saying, and build in that agility in terms of responsiveness and the ability to get to the ground and to get to the hotspots. We, as an organization, have got a very large footprint, large branch network, and large access across the continent. But that access and the continental reach doesn't necessarily get to people's homes in order to deliver food parcels. So how do we, in preparation for any kind of responsiveness, particularly a global pandemic or a crisis of any kind, learn to leverage that network and partner with players who are able to use our branch network to then get to the home networks of individuals, which is really where we've seen the coalface of the COVID-19 fight being, in terms of getting medical assistance to homes, particularly with hospital beds being few and far between, and also that need for very real-time support in the form of cash and costs, as I am.
And Anne, if I can just turn the focus to you, because particularly to put the focus on women and using the benefits of hindsight in terms of what was said previously in raising awareness of the gender parity gap and the importance of closing it, and how we can do the same as we go forward and make sure that tangible action does take place this time around. Because as you rightly say, in as much as COVID-19 has impacted us, it hasn't impacted us all the same, and women have been by far impacted the most compared to other groups. So as we do tackle gender issues, how, using what we did previously, can we be a lot better in affecting change in the space going forward?
Well, thank you so much, Fifi. I think one of the areas that we've been pushing as UN Women across the world, and in Africa in particular, has been this issue of women sitting in the decision-making tables. As the economic stimulus recovery programs are being defined and described and discussed, in South Africa, we've had many women leaders, but in many other African countries, from our analysis, it has not been strong enough at all. And what that has meant is that the structure of the economic stimulus and the relief is not been defined and designed in a way that is reaching those who need it the most, but rather sort of reinforcing the inequalities that already exist. And so, we have found it very useful to work with women's organizations in particular, who, and in South Africa, we partner with the South African Women in Dialogue, who've been working on this vulnerability assessment to rethink how do you actually identify and find household vulnerability in real ways. And of course, this is something that the country has been thinking a lot about through its social protection and social grants program. But we did find that there were those households that were just not able to deal with the shock at a very, very significant level. Food and dependency on food from supermarkets. One of the big differences between Southern Africa and West Africa, for instance, is the fact that in West Africa and East Africa, people grow food. And because they grow food, they were able to continue eating. In Southern Africa, it was long queues of miles and miles of people waiting for income. And so we've got to be able to create the kind of culture of self-reliance where there's real feeding and setting that up. The other big thing linked to that is that, you had the Solidarity Fund and others who were providing resources to be able to get the food, but the logistics systems were not as strong as they needed to be. And so it had to be really decentralized, using many organizations, churches, and so on. And so the social capital that exists in our economies is very, very strong and should not be seen as a once-off opportunity, but invested in really to help to build the kind of economies that are designed to partner with community organizations, with churches and so on, to be able to keep pushing on this kind of recovery efforts that are required. This is the same, and I say this in general, this is not just for women. Of course, South Africa has the added burden of having 8 million people living with HIV, and who, issues of distribution of antiretrovirals was just as severe as the distribution of COVID testing kits and so on. So really logistics and how we come up with this culture where logistics are designed in the same way that the private sector reaches everybody. It's interesting that during elections and during the census, we know how to reach everybody. But when it comes to some of these kinds of issues, we struggle to be able to reach every single household. And this is one where we have to be able to design and see what are the systems that we can build on and learn from. And we had to depend very heavily on civil society organizations and churches and others to be able to do a lot of this work. Finally, for us, the issue of violence and the war in the bedrooms became a significant issue. To Mandisa's point about the lack of data, data is a massive problem for us on this issue of gender violence. Because violence is in the household, is in the homes, and there was a lot of family violence. This is a whole new thing that emerged, where I think Kenya was reporting 4,000 teenage pregnancies in one district, in one county, and those are the ones that showed up. Right, but those are young girls who are locked up in their homes. So this is obviously coming from the family. So we have got to be able to rebuild families in ways that does not tolerate violence in the household. We had to intervene multiple times here, wee hours of the morning, because of women who were on the verge of very, very serious impacts on their lives because of violence at the home. And I think a lot of our first responders are not equipped enough at the level at the magnitude of the real problem to be able to respond quickly and efficiently at the level at which the problem really is. And so it is not something that it has always been a problem, but COVID-19 showed it up. And we had examples that we were sharing from UN Women, where in Europe they started coming up with interesting concepts of how women can report violence using code words. Through supermarkets, through their local stockfells, through different ways, because they couldn't reach the police stations, they couldn't reach the health centers. So having to really innovate, and this is where technology could play a part, really trying to innovate around this. So there's a lot of opportunity, in addition to the economy, to design the economy in a way that reaches everybody. And I tell you, if you design the economy as if women really, really matter, that economy is going to reach everyone. So you have to think about a young 15-year-old woman, as the sort of archetype of the kind of reach. If we reach everything that we can reach.
Agreed there, and I even say that even a corporate woman, because of course cases in the corporate sector of women who suffer gender-based violence are quite underreported because of the huge stigma that's attached to your C-suite executive who should know better and who should know smarter, but nonetheless it does have a bearing on their performance within the company and perhaps their ascension higher up the ladder. Nuru, if I just come to you also just to flesh out more from you on how we can strengthen the climate change agenda that you did mention you were quite worried about, and also the digital divide agenda that you also mentioned that you are quite concerned of. You know, as we go forward, how do we make sure that these 2 points are higher up on the agenda of both stakeholders in the private sector and also in the public sector?
Thank you so much, Fifi. I think I really I sympathize with the stories that Anne is sharing, because I always say it's a tough job being a woman.
Yeah.
But it's tough. It's not easy. But yeah, so I think in terms of this issue around climate change, I think we are really seeing more innovation, more green finance opportunities. Kenya Bankers Association, for example, has recently signed an MOU with the Kenya Climate Innovation Center, because we are finding that there's a gap in financing for startups and entrepreneurs who are operating in the green economy. So we are looking to see how can we collaborate where, for example, KCIC works at the front end of the business life cycle with the startups and those innovators who are just trying to test ideas through funding. And then we try to bridge that into the commercial finance. And this is really a blended approach that's known as blended finance. So I think we're seeing more conversation around the blended finance space within the green finance area. In Kenya, we're very pleased that the national government has introduced a policy that requires all affordable homes that are part of the government's Big Four agenda. They must meet certain green building standards. And that helps send the right signal that the government is interested in investing in the green economy across all infrastructures. So your real estate infrastructure space, and hopefully in turn within the health infrastructure space. I think COVID has unmasked the fact that many of our health infrastructures are wanting, particularly outside of the economic centers. So certainly there's that opportunity to see how to bring in technology, increase efficiency. Green is not always just about planting trees, it's also about efficiency and also promoting innovation and reducing waste. I think the one area maybe we might need to strengthen more is the waste economy. Across the continent, I think our waste economy is largely, again, informal. And that's really the lesson from COVID, right? The lesson is that we need to move away from having a large informal sector. And that includes a large informal waste sector, because waste can be gold. And I've had the opportunity to visit Ghana and Nigeria and to see some amazing innovations that innovators, including young innovators, are doing with waste. So we really need to repurpose and reframe how we think about waste on the continent, and also, of course also in my country, to see how we can invest more. In December, the government launched SME credit guarantee scheme. And one of the areas that the SMEs will be supported on is COVID resilience. So I would hope and would like to see that within that envelope of COVID resilience, that there will be green aspects around the green economy. So indeed, it's all about collaboration. Like I mentioned before, the MDBs, the multilateral development banks, have billions worth of dollars coming into the continent. Traditionally, MDBs compete to operate here because the returns are so good. So we need to make sure from a policy perspective that we're not just incurring debt or taking grants for the sake of it, but we're making sure that we're building a resilient economy, Fifi.
Right. So as we get into the final lap of this discussion, I'd like to be the mouthpiece of government, if I can. As we talk about collaboration and partnerships, quite often you find government saying that we've created the enabling environment and the backdrop for conducive business. But what we find from the private sector, and Samuel, you actually alluded to this, is the fact that sometimes the private sector can be too profit driven. We did see it transpire as within our fight against the pandemic, where some companies exploited consumers, charging exorbitant prices. So if partnerships are a matter of give and take, I'd just like to ask your view in terms of representatives of, or mostly representatives of private sector individuals. And Samuel, to begin with you, I mean, what is the give that businesses, the private sector, your colleagues in the space should be giving in this time as we try to empower the continent to grow back better?
Yes, I think firstly, private sector, we have to be more genuine, because I think historically we have probably used the community intervention platform as a platform where we showcase our brands, we want to be visible. Maybe we've even measured those kinds of indicators as to, okay, how much visibility was there around this activity we did. And that has probably justified governments in the ways that they see us in our interventions as private sector to say, are you really coming in to assist, or you have a different agenda? So the first thing that I think we have to demonstrate is that we are there to intervene as responsible citizens and as part of the communities where we operate, so that the common good, the public good, yes, it does benefit everyone indirectly after that, but at least the priority is that we are trying to create a society, a community, an environment that's better for everyone. And I think on the part of government, what would also help is transparency, enhanced transparency. What you find the private sector, counter-accusing the government on is, even if we did more, even if we were to come in and play a bigger role, sometimes we think we are doing things to no effect in terms of the targeted communities. And so I think transparency around where is the need, transparency around how much is being alleviated, where is the contribution of the private sector, Where are we complementing efforts of government and recognizing the effects and impacts that are being created through those collaborations much more transparently will encourage more private sector players to come through and commit their capital, their resources to the cause. You also find that I think there is the need, again, going back to the private sector, to coordinate ourselves better around the interventions that we do. And we have had examples where, certain institutions, hospitals were lacking, others were having surplus, or, cases where maybe what's actually a priority at that point in time is information and how we disseminate information, but we are prioritizing something else. And this has been because maybe we've been, much less coordinated about the interventions in the partnerships and the collaborations that we are trying to work through. So we ought to organize ourselves better for effect and for the impact that we desire to see.
I agree
and to
with
respect
you.
the fact that
I agree with you.
Yeah.
So it seems like time.
That's one area.
Seems like time has run away with us, and I agree with you there in terms of the level of transparency. I mean, especially as we are looking at the big figures that are associated with the vaccination rollout. So we don't want to see a repeat of leakages in the system and not knowing where money went and how money was spent, and all the corruption cases that we have had to deal with in the recent while. But just as we conclude this panel, your closing remarks on this state of give and take, and I'm particularly wanting to find out, as the private sector, what should your colleagues in this space be doing a lot more of in terms of achieving compromise and stronger partnerships? And Mandisa, if I can just come to you there for your concluding thoughts.
Fifi, I think for me the key takeout for this platform is shared value. Shared value, as highlighted by Sam earlier, is really the driving force that's going to ensure that we see it less of a give and take and more of a dance. I think we need to get better at getting used to how we use our strengths and leverage those strengths for the common good, and see it less of compromising and more of finding better ways of working together. The Old Mutual Partnership Awards platform gives us the avenue to showcase where partnerships are working across different sectors, humanitarian categories, public and private sector categories, working together with industry associations and professional bodies. And they are fantastic examples of success stories. We need to find those success stories, we need to lift them, and we need to put our heads together in terms of how we can further that work in a dance, as opposed to a tug of war. So those are my around shared value and how we can be more deliberate about delivering it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that we can all learn those moves. I believe that there was a major hit that did come out last year that the entire world knew the dance moves too. So it's definitely possible for us to go forward in one dance. But just if I can just get the concluding thoughts for this discussion on empowering the continent through partnerships from Anne, if I come to you first, and then I will conclude with Nuru. Anne?
Thank you. I want to say that the issue really of a triple bottom line for the private sector is so crucial, that sustainability has to be at the center of business, not because it's the cool thing to do, but because it's the business imperative. And we know for sure from our work on gender parity and gender equality in the private sector, we have the women empowerment principles. Many companies are signatories to these principles, but the tendency is to do one small thing about the principles, maybe focus on parity and leave out some of the other pieces. There are 7 principles, and these principles work through, from who you buy from, to what the culture of the organization is, to who leads in this organization. And companies that are very, very successful and committed to these women empowerment principles produce much stronger revenues. The bottom line increases easily by anywhere between 6 to 10% in a gender equal environment. And I think this works across for our COVID-19 experience, for the work that we've been doing across with governments and the private sector as well. The more that we pull together to deliver an agenda that really builds back a world that we all want to be a part of, the more likely we are to be able to produce better long-term results and not just short-term ones. And so as we move towards the vaccine, we at the UN are working on COVAX, and COVAX really is a whole partnership between the private sector and governments across the world. And this is an area that we are working very hard in to make sure that our frontline workers, many of whom, 77% of whom are women, will be the first in line across this African continent to be able to take advantage of this and also be part of the value chain of the supply of this. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to chat.
Certainly, and thank you for your thoughts. And I like that the more we pull together to build back a world that we all want to live, the better off we all are. Nuru, your concluding thoughts?
Sure. I think my main message is this issue of, and Mandisa has heard me talk about it, the COVID kairos, the window of opportunity that COVID has opened up for three particular areas: the SME sector, issues around climate resilience, and the fourth industrial revolution. I think we really need to partner more around that. And the final point is there are 300 million Africans living with a disability. That's the PWD economy. We need to make sure, as we're digitizing and innovating and doing all these wonderful things that we're doing, that we don't leave our brothers and sisters behind. Thank you.
Thanks, Nuru. And that is where we leave it. And as we did open up the discussion in saying we are still in testing times, but it has been quite encouraging to hear from the panelists that the level of collaboration between key agents of the economies is going strong. Of course, a lot more still remains to be done, and it is comforting to hear that there is awareness of this, and we are certainly looking forward to, as citizenry, seeing this more being done as all economies, including Africa, attempt to build back better. But that is where we leave it for this CNBC Africa special for today. And I would like to once again thank my panelists who were part of the conversation and who did give us their time today. That is Mandisa Motobela, the Head of Stakeholder Relations at Old Mutual Limited, and Githuku-Shongwe, the representative of UN Women, Nuru Mugambi, the Public Affairs Director at Kenya Bankers Association, and Samuel Matekete, Group Chief Executive Officer at Old Mutual Zimbabwe. And of course, the audience members for your time. We look forward to further engagements with you. But for now, from myself, Fifi Peters, it is goodbye.